Let's look at our good friend here, Nico Aris, the first gender-neutral planeswalker the game has seen. I think this card's quite good as well. Let's take a gander. X, 2 blue and a white to cast this thing. Legendary planeswalker Nico. Whenever they enter the battlefield, they create X shard tokens. So what are shard tokens? Let's take a look. Up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever it deals damage, return it to its owner's hand. +1 is kind of a bit whatever, but like bouncing your creature's not going to matter too much if their opponent's going to die. So ticking this up and making your thing unblockable, sure, pretty reasonable. -1, Nico Aris deals 2 damage to target tapped creature for every card you've drawn this turn. Now that's not exactly hard to do when you realise that shards are 2 mana enchantments that you can crack to draw a card. So you can definitely like draw for turn, crack a shard, and deal 4 damage with Nico's minus. Which I think is a very regular, very common line of play you're going to see with this card. I think it's pretty good. 2 to crack, I believe, yes. You know what, I'll even double check. Let's go bring up the non-fancy version of Nico just to make sure that we're not wrong about that. Yeah, they are enchantments with 2 colourless mana. Sacrifice this enchantment, scry 1, and then draw a card. Indeed, they are a they, which is important to note. They've made quite a deliberate statement of saying that Nico is gender neutral, so we'll try and keep that in mind as best we can. And then the other -1 here does make another shard token. So even if you don't make shards on the way in with Nico, you do get to -1 to make another shard. So at the very worst, you can just use this to draw cards if you don't think it's being attacked. I think the common lines of play for Nico are going to be casting this on turn 3 and just like using the abilities without paying X for it, or casting it on turn 4 and making 1 shard. I think if you top deck it later on, you're just going to make a pile of shards and draw loads of cards, absolutely. But I think most of the time you're going to be casting this on 3 or casting this on 4. And I think it's really flexible, very powerful, plays very well with Elspeth Conquers Death, because you can use all those abilities profitably when it comes back, and it's the kind of planeswalker your opponent's going to have to kill early. I like this. So on 3 you get no shards, correct. If you cast this for white, blue, blue, you do not get any shards, but you can -1 to get a shard if you would like. But I think you're going to be doing that a lot. I think you're just going to be casting it as a 3 mana planeswalker a lot of the time. I think this card's very flexible, very powerful. I think it's probably going to be in most of the blue-white decks you see for the next 2 years. I think Nico is great. I think their character arc is pretty cool. Love it. It's good stuff. We'll check it out. We move on to our next lovely gold card. We got Nico Defies Destiny. So I'm going to go on the record before we start looking at a chunk of these sagas and say that I think sagas are one of the best card designs Magic has seen in the last decade, honestly. They create so many meaningful gameplay decisions that are super fun, super interactive, and like increase replayability. So I love the fact we've got tons of gold sagas in this set. I think it's a really good thing for me. I also just love the artwork style. Look at the art on some of these cards. They're just truly gorgeous. We also know what a shard looks like by looking at this card, which is very, very cool. So, card here for Nico. You gain 2 life for every Foretold card you own in exile. You then add blue-white to cast Foretold spells. And then you can return a card with Foretell from your graveyard to your hand. I think this one's a bit clunky, honestly. 3 mana is quite a lot for all of these effects. There is more impactful things I think you can be doing. But Nico's cool. This Nico Defies Destiny is cool. The problem is it's clunky. I think it is very, very clunky. 3 mana is quite expensive for this. Yeah, I think okay is kind of the word I would go with too, Jason. Unlikely to be played. Probably not an awful sideboard card in slightly more aggressive metas. We'll have to wait and see. Again, some of these sagas down here are really cool, but I'm going to glance over them if I think they're like limited fodder. The Raven's Warning, however, is a very unique card, and I'm not sure how I feel about this one just yet. Another 3 mana blue-white saga here. The first chapter puts a 1/1 bird token into play, and you gain 2 life, which obviously just isn't very good by itself. Second one there, whenever 1 or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to that player, you look at that player's hand and then draw a card. Now, information like that is very powerful. Having perfect info about your opponent's available resources Really strong. So if the bird is able to stay alive, it draws you a card, and you get perfect information. And then the last chapter of this is super unique. You may put a card you own from outside the game on top of your library. This set has nearly as many tokens as Amonkhet. You are not wrong. There is a lot of tokens in this set. So yeah, the last chapter of this is just a wish. You have to wish from your sideboard like Feo wishes. This suffers from the same problem as Nico, I think, in that it is very slow and clunky. The mode you care about is probably mode 3. If the bird survives, you draw a card, that's great, but you're not paying 3 mana for a 1/1 that drew you a card. That's not a good playable Magic card. So this doesn't play very well with Uriah, because you don't actually want to flicker it, but the wish is very strong. So the question becomes, are we happy casting a wish for free on turn 6? And that's kind of the question that we have to answer as to whether the Raven's Warning is going to be good or not. Is a 0 mana wish on turn 6 a good card? And that's not really a question we can answer without seeing the format. It does a lot of different things, you're right, Jason, but the problem is it does them all very slowly and quite expensively for a 3 mana card. So it's difficult. This is the kind of card that might shine in a very mid-range focused format, but if the format is all Gruul Adventures and they're beating us down with dragons and swords, we're going to die before we get to do anything cool, which is kind of the issue with this card, I think. It's very unique, it does some very powerful stuff, but is 0 mana wish on turn 6 good enough? We'll have to wait and see. Not good with Uriah, I'm out. Fair enough. I can appreciate your bias in that scenario. Let's look at Vega the Watcher here. This card is super unique as well. I like this one. I'm just not sure where it fits. 3 mana 2/2 Flying Bird Spirit. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you draw a card. That counts adventures. I love this artwork. Some of the showcase art in this set is stunning. Like, it is just... I'm not a massive fan of the showcase treatment in a lot of scenarios, but by God, this set is beautiful to the point where I'm probably just buying a collector booster box because I want uncommons and commons that look awesome. I love it. I think it's great. Yeah, this card counts adventures. It counts the Titans from the graveyard. Yeah, maybe drawing cards for free off of a 2/2 flyer isn't bad. It's just like a pseudo more expensive Edgewall Innkeeper, and we all know how good Edgewall Innkeeper is. So I don't think this is unplayable by any stretch. I think Vega the Watcher could be your Innkeepers number 5 through 8 that are quite expensive, and make your adventures already like way better than they are. So we'll have to wait and see about this one, but I like it quite a lot. Yeah, graveyard spells too. Obviously plays very well with Uro, Croxer, anything you can cast. And any of the escape spells plays pretty good with Cling to Dust, stuff like that. Ooh, even Foretold spells, would you look at that? Because they're in your exile zone. So you get to draw cards every time you foretell as well. Yeah, I think this card could be good. It's the kind of card that you just have to kill. It's not very hard to kill. And I think that's the problem. Like, maybe you can't play this while Bonecrusher Giant is everywhere, because Bonecrusher Giant makes you look very silly for casting a 3 mana 2/2. But maybe if we look at this as like a 5 mana 2/2, so the goal is to cast Vega, cast a Foretell spell, or cast Vega, cast one of your adventure creatures, and draw a card immediately, then that feels a lot better at that point. So maybe that's good enough. I think this card has some potential, like a lot of potential. It's a good bird. I think it could definitely see some play. I like it quite a lot. It's good with cards that already exist, which is something that we're definitely looking for. We've got King Nafi's Betrayal here. Going to have to read this one to you. Oh, no, I have the English version on this page, so I can put it up for you. Excuse me. King Nafi's Betrayal is a card that has me very, very excited. This one is great with Uriah and just good in general. It just feels like Tiramet Calls the Dead got a lot better. 3 mana here. The first chapter makes each player mill 4 cards, fueling that black god, I might add. You can then exile a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard. And then on turn 2 and turn 3 of this chapter, you can cast spells from among the cards exiled with King Nafi's Betrayal, and you can spend mana as though it were mana of any colour. I'm not sure who's telling you this is bad. It exiles from both graveyards. You can exile something your opponent milled and cast it too. The key to this card, I think, honestly, is how good it is if you mill over a Urian. And I know we keep saying the Y word a lot tonight, because that card is a friend of mine. But if you mill Urian with this and you exile it, and then cast Urian next turn, I just get to go again. Like, I think this card's really good. It fuels Croxer, like in the same way that Tiramet Calls the Dead does. It even plays well with King Nafi, unsurprisingly, which we're about to see in a second because the card is named after him. I think this card does a lot of things. I think it's a powerful saga that plays very well with the kind of things that sagas care about. I like it. I recommend giving it a spin if you fancy that kind of play style. If everyone's telling you it's bad, maybe I'm massively overestimating this. But I think it's good. I think it's quite good. And I look forward to playing it in many, many shells. Nafi. Who names someone Nafi? Good question. Next card. Nafi. Betrayer King. Strange. Look at this very treacherous king here. 5 mana, 4/3. Other snow and zombie creatures you control get +1/+1. So zombie snow lord. 3 snow mana. Return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Woof. This thing's pretty good for 3 mana. The problem is it's really crap for 5. You really don't want to be casting this. You really want to be putting it in your graveyard with Nafi's Betrayal, the discard effects from Croxer or Liliana or Rankle, and bringing this thing back for 3 mana off of snow mana and just like bumping all your zombies, bumping all your snow creatures. I think this probably belongs in Sultai Snow. You can obviously just like flip this back into play off of the backside of Jawn as well, which is a very relevant thing because you just pump your Jawn that way, and if you're pumping Jawn, it makes it harder for your opponent to get rid of it, meaning you get more lands untapped. So definitely a nice little synergy there for sure. I think Sultai Snow, probably a very real deck. Maybe even 4-color Snow. And this card's probably in it in some capacity. So, yeah, for sure. Okie dokie. The Trickster God's Heist is a card that I'm not going to go over. It's very unique. If you, it's not very good, but if you like switching control of permanents, this is probably the card for you. Immersturm Predator. I like this card quite a lot as well. We're getting onto some of the really big jewels of the multicolored cards here. 4 mana, 3/3 flyer. It's fine, nothing exciting, but a decent enough rate. But this card reeks of Falconwrath Aristocrat. Whenever it becomes tapped, you can exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Feels very Desecration Demon in that capacity. But you can sacrifice another creature to give it indestructible and tap it. Now this is a very flexible card. It's very hard to kill, like Falconwrath Aristocrat. You sack a creature, Aristocrat benefits, all that kind of stuff. Give it indestructible, super hard to get rid of. And every time that happens, or your opponent points a removal spell at it, so you tap it to keep it safe, it gets bigger. But what you can also do with this card is sack creatures to exile cards from your opponent's graveyard. So you can just play this in Sacrifice and be like, okay, here's Predator. I'm going to sack my 0/1 goat from my Woe Strider to exile your Uro. And that is a fantastic piece of flexibility for a card that you already want to play, because it's so hard to kill and plays really well with your sacrificial synergies. How did that dragon get turned into a vampire? Did you ever watch Shrek? Dragons get themselves in a couple of interesting scenarios. Reread the card, what have I missed? What do you think I'm querying? How so? What do you think this card doesn't do that I've just told you it does? Yes, correct. So again, Patch, reread the card real quick. If you sacrifice a creature, this becomes tapped. Every single time it becomes tapped, you eat a card from a graveyard. So you can, on command, sacrifice your own creature to tap your predator to eat a card from their graveyard. Does that make sense? There you go. I love it when the light bulb moment connects. There you go. You figured it out. That is a trick that you can do, and that's kind of what I was getting at. Like, having flexibility on this card to be able to aggressively attack your opponent's graveyard, even though that's not what you're normally going to use it for, is really good. And we saw that from cards like Cling to Dust, and why they've kind of shone so much in the formats they've started seeing play in. So this is a really well-designed aggressive threat that has some additional utility on it. I like it. I like it a lot. Definitely think I'll be screwing around with some Predators next to some Corvolds, for sure. You want to talk about cool art, by the way? Just look at this thing. This card's not very good. We're not going to hover on it very long, but god damn. This is WotC's answer to Uro? Probably makes sense. But just this artwork is just stunning. Really, really stunning. I think the Bloody Massacre is not very good, honestly, unfortunately. There's some more draft filler in forms of some sagas down here. We'll look at Waking the Trolls. This is a very, very interesting one. Kind of dangerous, I think, honestly, as well. 6 mana saga. Very expensive, especially for a Gruul card. Not something you see very often. Chapter 1. Destroy target land. Oh. Flickering that with Orion is quite good. I'll be honest. Chapter 2. Put target land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So I can blow up my opponent's lands and take control of them if I want to. Chapter 3. Choose target opponent if they have less lands than you, which they should. Create a number of 4/4 trolls with trample equal to the difference. That's going to end some games pretty fast, I would think. This card's very cool, but it is the definition of a Durdle fest. 6 mana cards have to be good. This is Durdle USA. If the format is all about screwing around and trying to one up the other mid-range player, this card's hot. It's so good. It's so much virtual card advantage. But if your opponent is playing the card Embercleave, you probably shouldn't have Waking the Trolls in your deck. Just kind of the truth, sadly. Make a troll deck. I love the idea. I think the trolls are very, very cool. We got a good friend of mine. I love this card as well. Battle for Bretagard. Another fantastic rare that was spoiled quite early. Let's take a look at this one together. 3 mana saga, again, when it comes to play, makes a 1/1 white human warrior token. Second chapter makes a 1/1 green elf warrior token. And the third chapter lets you make a copy of as many artifact tokens or creature tokens with different names as you would like. Now, the first 2 chapters of this aren't great. You're just making 2/2s worth of stats across multiple bodies. The key from this comes from spending the turns that this is in play, dumping 1,000,001 different tokens with different names into play. And that's not impossible. We've seen an awful lot of tokens in this set, from 1/1 birds to all kinds of garbage. And proliferating on multiple things, including treasures, I might add, with this card, seems super strong in some kind of green, white, or Naya token shell. So if this card is good, it's in those shells. Plays very, very well with that. I think this might suffer from the same problem as something like Song of Freyalise did in Dominaria, where the first 2 chapters are a bit too vanilla, even though the last one is insane. But the last one here is very good. If there's a way to facilitate it by making all kinds of tokens and continuing to block, we've got ourselves a winner. Okie dokie. So we got some more general odds and sods down here, some draft filler. People like Magic quite a bit, but I think this card is quite expensive, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We're going to take a look at Thurger's Retribution. This card is priced to move. This might honestly just be the best saga in the set, if not second behind Battle of Fire and Ice, or whatever the red-blue one is called that we'll get to in a minute. 4 mana. First chapter makes a 4/4 white angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance. So at the very worst, you are playing a 4-mana 4/4 Vigilant Flyer. The second chapter gives angels you control tap to destroy target creature with power less than this creature's power. The third chapter gives angels you control double strike until the end of turn. All three of these things are very good. More importantly, this plays absurdly well with Emeria's Call. Emeria's Call also makes 4/4 angels. Like, you can just kill people with double striking angels from the last chapter of this. And of course, it does play very, very well with, Doom Foretold and Urian, like we've said, and like Rai says in chat. And it only costs 4, exactly. This thing is priced to move. It is a very well-costed card. And this is the kind of card that's good in an aggressive meta because the first chapter just makes a relevant blocker. Big, chonky angel. This card's good. This card's very good. There's not too much more to say about it. It's very obviously good in certain shells, and it plays very well with all the angel payoffs we've looked at today. So, no doubt this one sees a fair bit of play. We then get to Kaya, the Inexorable. Unfortunately, I wish there was more to say about Kaya, but Kaya's design's a little bit boring. I think the card's very good. It will see some play, but it is just a bit boring. She's a 5-mana planeswalker here whose +1 puts a ghost form counter onto one target non-token creature. If it dies, it then, or is put into exile, I should say, sorry, it returns to its owner's hand and makes a 1/1 flyer. The -3 is exile target non-land permanent. Not yet, Ryan, not yet. It is down the list, don't worry. And the -7, at the beginning of your upkeep, you can cast a legendary spell from your hand or your graveyard or from stuff you own in exile without paying its mana cost. Why is this card boring? Because it fits the old stereotypical 5-mana planeswalker template where the +1 is virtual card advantage or actual card advantage. The minus is removal, and the ultimate should just win you the game most of the time. The card's really good. It's going to slot into a lot of the black-white mid-rangey shells and just be played, and people will be very happy with it. But it's just kind of boring, sadly. I was hoping for something a little more exciting from Kaya. Card's definitely good, though. No doubt about that. So we on to what I think, for me, is possibly the best saga in the set. And I'm saying that knowing the black-white one exists. Battle of Frost and Fire. This 5-mana saga here, blue-red. The first chapter of this deals 4 damage to every non-giant creature and each planeswalker. And this is the one that I'm most interested in with this card. And I think this is so good for a couple of reasons. So 4 damage, yes, kind of sucks. Doesn't kill Lovestruck Beast. Doesn't kill giants, which might very well be a relevant line of text as well. And if there are giants everywhere, this card is obviously significantly worse. But I'm more interested in the fact that you can put this card into play from Genesis Ultimatum. So the ability to ultimatum into a sweeper is not something you could do before outside of hitting exactly Ugin. So having a 5-mana card you can cast as a sweeper in your deck that is also just good when you go to cast your 7-mana ramp payoff is very powerful. I think that's something that cannot be understated. The second chapter, Scry's 3, which is going to set you up for the third chapter, that whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 5 or greater this turn, draw 2 and discard 1. And you see this natural play pattern of casting this on turn 5 into casting Genesis Ultimatum on turn 7, or on 7 mana, and triggering that final chapter to draw 2 cards in the process. I think this card's very good in the Team of Shells, just very, very good in the Team of Shells. It's probably not quite as universally powerful as the Black-White Saga, which is going to be more splashable and playable in a couple other decks, from like Abzan to just straight Black-White to Esper to whatever. But for specifically Genesis Ultimatum decks, I think this card is a huge hit. I think this is also really good in like Grixis Giants, for example, with Croxer and Glimpse the Cosmos and these Calamity Bearers and stuff that we were talking about earlier. So can definitely see this card being an absolute powerhouse in some of those decks. I think it's very, very good. Invasion of the Giants is pretty vanilla. Not going to spend too much time on that one. We will take a second to look at Binding of the Old Gods, though. This card, I think, is being recognized pretty slowly as one of the better sagas in the set, even though it is only an uncommon. 4 mana is quite a lot, but when it comes into play, it will destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. That's a pretty damn good first chapter, which is kind of what you want when you're thinking about Urian shenanigans or stuff like that. This is just straight up, like, Vindicate, but not for lands, on the first chapter of this saga. The second chapter is also very good here. You search your library for a forest to put it into play tapped. Now, importantly, that is just forest. That is not basic forests. This can search for triomes, it can search for shocklands in historic, it can search for snow dual lands in limited, and put those into play and ramp you up, which is great. And then the last chapter of this does give your creatures Death Touch, which probably doesn't matter that much, honestly. It'll be relevant sometimes, but that's not why you're playing the card. You're playing this for the power of the first chapter and the second chapter, which make it play very, very well with Urian. So I expect to see it in a fair number of Abzan or just green-black Urian shells in general. It turns out that having multiple 4-mana sagas that you can cast the turn before your Urian is probably pretty good, in fairness. So I like this one a lot. Expected to see a fair bit of play as well, to be honest. Harold here is the elf payoff. He's going to see playing elves, and that's about it. Very much the same as the saga of the same. You feel like your Vorinclex is just going to die. Yeah, but he got in for 6 damage before he did that. And that's kind of what makes Vorinclex good. He's still going to have immediate impact, even if they do have an answer. Harold Unites the Elves here is a very powerful card. I should take a second to take a look at this one, because this is more than just generic elf payoff. This one is really quite good. Another 4-mana green-black saga here that when it comes into play mills you for 3 cards. You may put an elf or a Tyvar from your graveyard onto the battlefield. If you can find a way to guarantee the top card of your library is Tyvar, casting this and flipping a 4-mana Planeswalker into play off your 4-mana saga, that is good. That is some good stuff. More importantly, this doesn't care about milling the Tyvar. If it's in the graveyard already, it's just a reanimation spell. You can 4-mana reanimate Tyvar. Or any elf, which is strong. That's some good stuff. Second chapter puts a +1/+1 counter onto every single elf you control. And last but not least, when an elf you control attacks this turn, target creature and opponent controls get -1/-1 until the end of the turn. So if you've got a nice big old wide board of elves, you will Plague Wind your opponent. So this card is powerful, but it's not very flexible. It kind of needs things to go right for you. So whether or not this card sees play largely will depend. I will stay hydrated. Thank you very much, Ryan. I appreciate that. Been a lot of talking over the last 4 hours, so unsurprisingly. Did not think this was going to take this long, but hey, that's why we live and learn, right? I think a large part of the power of this card largely going to depend on whether or not the reanimation chapter number 1 is good enough by itself. Because chapter 2 and chapter 3 are some huge upside, but it's also very easy to interact with them. So chapter 1 has to be the breadwinner of this saga, and if that's the case, it will be good, and it will see a fair bit of play. Definitely a reason to be green-black elves, though, for sure. Very, very powerful to just reanimate your 4-mana Planeswalker with upside. So definitely can see that. We get to what I believe is Rye's favourite saga of the set. This thing is also kind of bananas. Let's take a look at Showdown of the Skalds. Boros Saga. Chapter 1. Exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until the end of the turn, end of your next turn, you can play them. Very, very much shades of Escape to the Wilds. Light up the stage, those kind of effects off this first chapter. 4-mana draw 4, if you can use all those cards, is strong. That is a haymaker of an effect. And then chapter 2 and chapter 3, whenever you cast a spell this turn, you may put a +1/+1 counter onto a target creature you control. Chapter 2 and chapter 3 are fine here. Obviously play very well with you milling over loads of cheap spells that you can cast immediately once you do this. It's a very good top end for Boros aggro for exactly that reason. Yeah, I very much agree. But this card also plays very well in some of the bigger Boros decks too, because the first chapter is just so powerful. It has shades of Escape to the Wilds, as I say, so just casting this and drawing 4 cards, especially if one of those cards is a Orion or a Flicker of Fate or any of these effects that let you just flick the Saga out and then bring it back again and draw 4 more cards. It's just some real raw card advantage. As I say, not quite as good as Escape to the Wilds. Obviously, it's 1 mana less, and you can't play lands off of it, which is a fairly... Well, you can play lands, but you can't play the extra land off of it, which is a fairly big deal. But this card's good. I think most of the Boros shells in Standard, possibly even some of the 3-color shells, are just going to want this as a raw recovery engine. Yeah, it's also not legendary, for sure. So hitting another one off of your first one is also equally good. So yeah, like Showdown a lot. Think the Boros player is going to be very, very happy with that one. Very, very happy with that one. I don't think Coma is very good, so I'm not going to spend much time looking at it, unfortunately, but feel free to in your own time. We have the Bears of Littjara, which is another rare that I've seen a little bit of talk about. I'm not massively familiar with this one myself. Mardu Urian is a thing, 100%, yeah, but that deck does have Treacherous Blessing already, so touch and go. Haven't seen this card basically at all, so I'm going to read it with you. It might be awful. 3 mana here. Makes a 2/2 Shapeshifter with Changeling. The 2 mana mode makes any number of target Shapeshifters into base power 4/4. And then the third mode, you can choose up to 1 creature or planeswalker. Each creature with power 4 or greater you control deals damage equal to its power to that permanent. I think I've just realised something, chat. I think these shape-shifting cards are also a plant for the D&D set. Because there's no way the D&D set doesn't have a Mimic in it, right? Or like Mimics in general. They're such a huge part of Dungeons & Dragons. Even like Scolomancy, not Scolomancy, sorry, the Strixhaven, the Wizard School set can have shapeshifters and form changing because it's all about magic, right? So I find it very hard to believe we don't have a good chunk of shapeshifters on the way, based on the themes of the next couple sets. And if that's the case, this card seems real good in that deck, very much like Absorb Identity did earlier on. This card will be good if there's good shapeshifters. It's really, really that simple, I think. This card I saw a numerous number of people playing earlier on. The 3 Seasons party got an upgrade. Yeah, exactly. Definitely some flexibility there, sure. 2 mana Saga here. Goes with the Snake guy for sure. Yeah, I can see that too. So 2 mana mill 3 cards. As we said earlier on, Sultai Snow definitely in the market for putting cards in its own graveyard, courtesy of the Snow Lord and Uro. In historic formats and many other shenanigans, so that's pretty damn solid. Chapter 2 here, return up to 2 target snow permanents from your graveyard to your hand. 2 mana double regrowth is it's pretty good, honestly, on next to a mill 3. And then mode number 3, choose 3 cards in each graveyard. Their owners shuffle them into their libraries. So, incidental graveyard hate too. Yeah, I believe Dono's correct, Patch. I think the changeling will count for whichever one you want it to, but I don't believe it counts for them all. Because of the way that Tajuru Paragon is worded, I think. I think this card's pretty flexible. It's a bit innocuous. It doesn't do a whole lot. It's a bit boring, but all of these effects seem pretty relevant to the deck that's going to want it in like Sultai Snow or Sultai Graveyard, that kind of thing. I can see the 3 Seasons being playable. Seems cool. Seems very, very cool. We get on to the artifacts, of which there is a handful, and that will be the last of this set review. Got to be mindful of milling with rogues. Yeah, sure. Rogues are a deck. Let's not forget that. As much as I may try to forget that, I will not forget that. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the fact this card's name is Colossal Plow. And then remind you that we are in fact a good Christian Magic channel. Magic players only want one thing, and it's disgusting. Now we're going to move on to Cosmos Elixir. Cosmos Elixir, a card here that is an interesting one that a few people have discussed with me as well. 4-mana artifact here that at the beginning of your end step, you can draw a card if your life total is greater than your starting life total. If not, draw 2. No idea, Patch. No idea at all. This is an interesting little card. It's a really weird Phyrexian Arena variant. We've already seen there's a couple of decks that care about life gain in this format, and it's not too hard to be above your starting life total and just have this thing be an actual Phyrexian Arena that doesn't do any damage to you. But I think this is probably just better in like Commander, for example, where it's just going to be drawing your cards basically always, and playing very well with like a Loro and other Commander mainstays and staples. But this is a cool little card. It definitely resembles a slightly more expensive colorless Phyrexian Arena. So if you can keep your life total high, this might be a card you're interested in for those value-y, attrition-y matchups. So definitely worth acknowledging that it exists. We then get on to another one that was mentioned earlier on here, Funeral Longboat. This is quite the common. Quite the common. 2-mana, 3/3 vehicle with vigilance. With crew 1. Not quite Smuggler's Copter. Not quite. Even further away from it than the blue vehicle from earlier. But we now have 2 vehicles that are both 2-mana 3/3s with crew 1. Both of which I think are quite good, given that the blue vehicle cares about vehicles. There's a good chance this card is just very playable in aggressive shells. The first couple of vehicles in your aggro deck have a lot of value in general, from helping you have some playability against sweepers, and usually being quite overstatted for their cost. And this is just so easy to crew. Tokens can crew this, just everyone can crew this. I really wouldn't be surprised to see Funeral Longboat being played in the same shells as the other blue god, as Cosmina. I think this card is very, very flexible, very playable. Seems like a good one to exist to me. We have Maskwood Nexus. Now this card is a mouthful. 4-mana artifact here. Creatures you control are every single creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. You can then make a 2/2 blue shapeshifter token with Changeling for 3 mana and tapping this. Now this card enables some bullshit. I've seen a few lists floating around being posted already. From Deathbellow Warcry, the put 4 Minotaurs into play 7-mana spell. Because it turns out this turns everything in your deck into Minotaurs. They definitely put it deliberately very, very much next to the World Tree, which is a combo too, would you believe? If you want to name God on this, you can just flip all your creatures into play courtesy of the World Tree, and I'm sure that'll end the game in just order. But this is another one of those cards that enables some real dumb bullshit, because Terror of the Peaks exists, and if you can just change Terror of the Peaks creature type and then flip it into play from Deathbellow Warcry, from the World Tree, very much like Genesis Ultimatum, your opponent is just gonna die. They're just gonna die. And unsurprisingly, Deathbellow Warcry plays pretty well with Ironcrag Feet, so you can be doing that as early as like turn 4. So there's some degeneracy that can be enabled by this card. It is very sweet. I think the problem is I don't see it doing anything fair. If this card is good, it's because it's doing something innately unfair with the World Tree, with Warcry, that kind of thing. Even like Lilion as contract in Historic and just making everything into demons. I don't know. Like this is not a deck, not a card that a fair deck wants. I think that's the thing that's worth noting. So. Pyre of Heroes, another exciting one that's been talked about a few times now. I think this is the perfect example of a card that is really kind of hard to evaluate without playing with it a bit. The Return of Birthing Pod was heralded when this card was spoiled. 2-mana artifact, spends 2 mana to tap it. As you sack a creature for cheering up a creature from your library that shares a creature type with it, but has a converted mana cost of 1 higher than the creature you sacrificed. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think this card is very, very good. We've already seen that Wizards is happy to lean in towards tribal synergies, but not only that, there's just so many shapeshifters and changelings and this kind of thing, like mimics on the way maybe with the D&D set and spells in wizard school and stuff. I find it hard to believe we won't accidentally end up with a chain you can just go up to do something silly, you know, because you'll have tribal synergies that are like a couple of CMC apart, but you can get there by using changelings to fill the gap. I like pod effects. I like pod effects a lot. I don't think this card is going to be like broken or anything, but it's the kind of card you got to be real careful about what creature types you're putting on things, because it can enable some real silly shenanigans if you're not careful. So don't mind this existing. Very cool to see a pod variant that might actually be good. Let's just hope the Wizards are careful with their creature types and don't print a changeling that does something dumb when it dies if a creature enters the battlefield this turn. Something like that. What more do we have to look at? That's the last interesting artifact for me. I don't think Replicating Ring is going to do very much. There's only, I think, a couple lands left to talk about. We'll briefly just brush over the pathways. We get the other 4 that weren't in Zendikar Rising. That's going to be fantastic for so many mana bases that needed the pick-me-up, that didn't currently have the correct mana to make their plays. There's a selection of uncommon lands in this set as well. I think most of them are actually quite good. I'm going to go over them real briefly, not talk over them too much. I think some of them will be like Commander staples, but I think there's 2 of them I think might legitimately see some constructed play. They're all tap lands that come into play tapped, and for a combination of 2 colors, you can sacrifice it to do a thing. So the white one here is 2, 3, 4, 5 mana and tapping it itself to gain 2 and draw 2. The blue one here is 6 mana to reanimate something, which I think this one might be quite good. It's quite free in your mana base for the most part. The one I'm most excited about is definitely the black one, because this is very similar to Ramunap Ruins in the sense that you can spend 4 mana and tap it to deal 3 to your opponent and make them discard a card, which is Blightning to the face on a land is pretty good. Pretty excited about this one. The green-white one seems pretty lackluster. It just puts +1/+1 counters onto creatures, gives them vigilance and lifelink. You do have to sacrifice the land, yes, correct. Very much like Ramunap Ruins. The black one here creates an angel. This one might be pretty good too. It's 3 mana and tapping it to make and sacking a creature to make a 4/4 angel. So the angel decks might very much want Great Hall. I can see that being a thing that happens as well. And the green one here is the elf one, and it gives a creature you don't control -2/-2 and makes 2 1/1s. And that seems a bit awful. I didn't even mean to graze over the Gruul one. I was trying to avoid the Izzet one. The Izzet one is awful. Please don't play the Izzet one. We don't talk about the Izzet one. They don't get good lands. They just don't. The other one I should really acknowledge real quick before we get onto the lands down here that have effects and stuff. The red-white one is interesting for a lot of people because it can shoot a Embercleave, which is something that a mid-range deck might want. It is quite expensive. It costs you 5 mana total and sacking the land itself to do that, to go fetch up Embercleave, but it's a thing you can definitely do. So yeah, these uncommon lands, definitely pretty versatile. Some powerful effects, and powerful effects on lands are always interesting because they are quote-unquote free, for lack of a better phrase. We get to what is almost certainly the best land in the set. The World Tree, which I'm going to take a second to vent a small frustration. Wizards, please tell me what the first word in this card's name is. It is the World Tree. Insinuating it is in fact the only World Tree. Why is this land not legendary? Why? Is there a second tree for another world? I need to know. I do actually know the answer to that for what it's worth. Mark Rosewater put out a statement saying that they don't like the play patterns that legendary lands offer, but I think from a flavor perspective, it sucks so bad. Like, this is meant to reference the actual fucking bridge between realms when it comes to Norse mythology. It is the World Tree. It's meant to be a big, super spectacle powerful, magical thing, and it's just a non-legendary land, which I think is a bit crap. I think if you don't want this to be legendary, you just call it Branches of the World Tree, or Spirit of the World Tree, or what, just some other variation. Don't use the word the. Like, if you use the prefix the, you're insinuating it is a big deal, it is the only one, and that needs to be on legendary lands. I've said this for a few years about, like, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. It's like, yes, Valakut is in fact the only Molten Pinnacle. Why is it not legendary? Anyway, the World Tree does come into play tapped. Good start. Taps for green. But as long as you control 6 or more lands, your lands can tap for any colour. It's rather good that you can fetch this off of Golos. Golos puts a World Tree into play, and then all your lands tap for every colour from that point onwards. It's pretty good. And this not being legendary means you really don't care about drawing multiples, so you can just play 4 of this, and then play a ton of ultimatums and stupid, big, powerful spells, and not care about the colour requirements, because it fixes for you, and it's very hard to interact with in that case. The last bit of text on this, the alternative win con, if you like: white, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green. Also known as please spend 10 mana because you have a World Tree in play. Sacrifice the World Tree, search your library for any number of gods, and put them directly onto the battlefield. You're not going to be doing that very often, mainly because most of the gods are not particularly, worth tutoring out for 10 mana, but as we saw, the artifact is in this set that kind of turns everything into a god if you want to, and occasionally someone's going to build some random combo decks that have that artifact in it, the World Tree. On 11 mana, they're going to crack a World Tree, dump 4 Terror of the Peaks and a million other creatures into play, and you are going to die. And it's kind of a thing that they can do. This card's very good. Very, very good. A very powerful, unique land that we haven't seen before. Chromatic Lantern for free on a land once you hit 6 mana is absurd. This will almost certainly be a commander staple till the end of time in 5-color decks. It's super strong. And one of the best pieces of fixing I think we've ever seen. So the World Tree will see a fair bit of play, I would think. Card's pretty great. Pretty great. We have Faceless Haven. The new Mutavault, as it's been called by a handful of people. Snowland here that taps for colourless, but for 3 snow, you can have it become a 4/3 creature with vigilance, and all creature types until the end of the turn. Mana lands are very good, folks. Even spending 3 mana to activate this when Mutavault costs 1, this thing's really big. It has vigilance. It has all the relevant creature types. It gets buffed by the zombie Snow Lord and becomes a 5/4 with vigilance. The only reason this card might not see a ton of play is if it's fighting with Crawling Barrens. And I think the decks that will play this, it's not fighting with Crawling Barrens, are like Jawn decks or snow decks that care about having another snow land or another snow permanent, which is what Faceless Haven is. It's a snow land, whereas Crawling Barrens isn't. I do think on the mana land front, Crawling Barrens is probably the better card, though. So those, big red decks and other 2-color mid-range decks that are happily playing Crawling Barrens at the minute, I wouldn't expect them to be changing to this, mainly because 3 snow is a harder activation cost in your 2-color deck as well. But I think Barrens is just a better card. But all the snow decks, especially the 2-color ones, almost certainly slamming 4 of this. Anything with enough snow mana to activate it, I think. It counting as a snow permanent is very relevant, and just being a big-ass vigilant body. Good land. Well designed, and will fit into the handful of decks that want it very, very well, I think. And last but not least, we have Tyrite Sanctum down here, which is a super interesting card that I'm not actually entirely sure how to evaluate. Taps to add a colorless. It can also spend 2 mana and tap it to make target legendary creature into a god. In addition to its other types, it gets slightly bigger. And then you can spend 4 mana and tap it, and sacrifice the Sanctum to put an indestructible counter onto target god. This land is really slow and clunky, but that's a very powerful effect. You basically have the ability to make any creature in the history of Magic indestructible with enough time. And that can obviously make a number of creatures pretty dangerous. I know a few people were just joking about wanting to make Thalia into being the god she deserves, but And, you know, there are other things you can do with this to just make it very annoying, indestructible creatures. It is slow and clunky. Seems like it's more likely to be a commander card than anything else. Plays very well with every legendary creature in that format, obviously. But not something I'm going to look over too lightly. This is a card, the kind of card that could definitely maybe see a little bit of play if there's a creature that's worth playing Protect the Queen around. And that's kind of the only thing that we don't necessarily know right now. So, card's very cool. Might find a home outside of Commander if we're lucky. We'll have to wait and see.